Welcome to Sinister Heroes. I'm your host, Danny Iniquitous. Thank you for tuning in. Today's episode, we are talking about the Fathomless Warlock. This is a Warlock patron that came out in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. We're going to do a little bit different than what we've done with the Undead and the Undying patrons. We're going to more talk about role-playing aspects and a little bit more about some of these things in this class that people kind of misconstrue or think are only viable in certain scenarios and how to get around that. So without further ado, Fathomless Warlock. So, the Fathomless Warlock. You are a warlock that has made a pact with some sort of otherworldly water elemental or underwater creature like a kraken or demigods or gods that have been venerated and live in planes that are purely comprised of water or nightmarish creatures somewhat similar to the great old ones, because if you know anything about Cthulhu, he's currently slumbering underneath the ocean. So if you'd like that kind of scary, evil-minded, dark depths kind of a concept, this is very, very cool. And if you take into context the way the world has seen the ocean in times like primitive times or medieval times as this vast, dangerous entity that also gives and takes away, and you can get lost in forever or drown and just be dragged into the darkness underneath. Very cool, and there's a lot of storytelling that can be done there. It's very flavorful. You can really kind of create your own reasoning for that to happen. Now, right off the bat, people are going to tell you when you pick this patron, it's only really going to be viable in situations where you're around water. Don't get me wrong, like there's a lot of that's true that will come up in the subclass features, but you can always make things work for your environment. Again, by talking to your DM and making sure certain things are at least usable in the campaigns that you're playing. But one of the things about this particular patron that I like to do is this is one of those patrons where I would not only play the warlock, but I would also play the patron, or at least like a great deal of interactions with the patron would be kind of coming from my mind. One of the great ways to make this into a situation where you're not around a lot of water is if your patron has sent you out onto land, maybe to find an artifact of theirs that has been stolen and is being held on land for the purpose of weakening him or her or whatever the entity may be, which is a great reason to send out one of its thralls, one of its warlocks that is being trusted to achieve this goal and bring something back to the patron, making it very tangible, making it very realistic, because you need water to survive. So this could be a very, very common interaction between you. Like, say you reach a lake and you're going to fill up your water skin, and as you do so, you get this visage of your patron that wants a status report or wants to know what's going on, or is very involved in what the land is like. It's a very great way to have a very active patron in your storytelling. Also, if you're maybe a warlock that has broken a pact, maybe you were a sailor and you made a pact with a water entity, and now you failed or you refuse to do a task, and in order to escape its grasp, you've ventured deeper into land. So that way makes it a little bit more viable for you to be like in a desert area, because you're trying to be as far from your patron as possible. And that's a real great way to set up this dynamic of yeah, you got your power from this patron, but you failed and you're in fear because you've done wrong, and maybe you're trying to figure out a way to make amends for it or to get out of it, or to fix the problem, or to ultimately multi-class into another class. That would be a great setup for that if you wanted to take in some of these things. I think it's very cool. I think you can do a lot with it, and this is one of those things where it's the more creative you are, the more fun you're going to have, and the more fun your DM can have, especially when they take an interest in being the patron and playing those things out for you. So without any more of my introduction into the background of a patron, we're going to talk a little bit about what the abilities are, but we're not going to dive too deep in what their applicable purposes are, but real ways that you can use them in your game and feel like a Fathomless Warlock. At level 1, you're going to get 2 abilities, the first of which is Gift of the Sea. This gives you 40 feet swim speed as well as the ability to breathe underwater. This generally really won't come up a lot unless you're specifically forced into a situation where you go underwater, which is rare. Even in a seafaring campaign, you're really not going to be doing a lot of underwater espionage, and also you're a warlock. you're not really going to be sneaking in and doing roguelike activities from underneath the ocean to get onto a ship or something. It's really unusual, but it gives you this great feeling that you've made a deal with your patron, and it didn't just give you an ability, it changed who you are. And you play around with that and get the opportunity to really begin to indulge yourself whenever you see water and refresh yourself, and being in there, it should make you feel good. You know, like if you're in a little lake, you go in there, swim around, make sure you're safe. You know what? It's time to rest. You're going to sleep in the lake, and you're cool and you're fine, and you don't have to worry about anything else. And you get that nice little secluded feeling where maybe you can contact your patron in peace and just be at one with the ocean. And that's a cool thing. This is it's a great vibe for like a lizard folk or a triton who loves that ocean feel and still kind of needs to like reinforce that that's what they made this pact for, and who they are. So I think it's fun, but ultimately it really doesn't do much for your gameplay, but it's a great RP element. You know, if you needed to avoid something, if you were looking to get away, that's a great way to do it. It's a great way to work on things on your own in seclusion. It's a great way to set up scenarios where you might need to lure someone somewhere or listen into something that you're not supposed to. The other ability you get at level 1 is called Tentacles of the Deep. This gives you the ability to summon a spectral tentacle. It's 10 feet long, it has a range of 10 feet, and it does cold damage. There's 1d8 in the beginning, and then bumps up to 2d8 at level 10. You can do this a number of times equal to your proficiency modifier. This is a very cool ability. This is your real offensive ability. This is what you really look for, what the Fathomless Warlock to want to use and to do. It's great because it's ranged, so you do have a lot of availability to do cool things with it. Later on it gets a little better, but we'll cover that. If I was playing this Warlock, I would creep up that tentacle so much. I want it to be like from the bog of evil existence, where it's just like seeping disgusting goo, and because it deals cold damage, all of it just kind of emits this like frost and fog around it, so it's very eerie and unsettling feeling. You throw this up a couple of times, it's a great way to add damage to you. It's also a great way to set up something to distract the enemy. It has a 10-foot range, so you can use it behind lines or in between lines as like a middle person. It also reduces the move speed of someone hit by it, which is great. So the creature will lose 10 movement speed if they're hit, which is great because now it takes them longer to get to you. And you can move it as a bonus action every turn and cause it to attack, much like Spiritual Weapon. This is a very cool activity. It's a very cool ability to use because it sets up this wonderful world of changing the battlefield, where the battlefield becomes like an ocean and you can now warp how it is whenever you feel like. You change the way it is, seeing your own needs and doing so. It's very cool. It's a very great way to limit enemy movement, because they have to avoid going there because they'll never make it to where they have to go because that'll be in their way, and you have a long range to cast it. So if something's trying to escape, throw it in front of them, hit them and slow them down. That's a great tool that you can use. You get a good amount of times to use it. It goes with your proficiency modifier, so the higher level you go, the more frequently you'll be able to use it, which is great, which is fine. I think it's an okay thing. It's something I wish you could have gotten back at a short rest, but then you would have only been able to do it once, so fine with it, great. I think the potential of it is better in more tactical players because you can do a lot, and limiting movement speed is great because you'll find as you put other spells in conjunction with it, it's going to be detrimental from them being able to escape them, especially if it causes difficult terrain. So now the land or the area that you're fighting in is now it can just turn. It can just become something it wasn't before. And that's very, very thematic of like an oceanic theme of just a storm coming up or rough waters hitting out of nowhere. It's very cool. I enjoy the flavor of it, and it's really applicable in a lot of scenarios, and it's fun to use, you know? Like, this is probably an Eldritch Blast character, or if you wanted to go as a melee fighter with a, Pact of the Blade, grabbing another ranged thing like a halberd, like that would be awesome, because you'd have these two things on opposite sides swinging, and you never directly in melee combat. That gives you a cool advantage and a couple of tricks that you can use. So definitely want to check that out as fun, as far as one of the more reasons to jump into this class. At 6th level, you're going to get the ability Oceanic Soul. This gives you resistance to cold damage, which is always a benefit to have resistance to certain damage types. It helps. It's nothing to sneeze at. You might never know when that's actually going to save your life. Also, it gives you the ability to communicate telepathically with any entity that's fully submerged, as long as you are fully submerged. It's an interesting communication technique. Again, it could be viable in certain tactical scenarios, but that is really very few and far between, even in water-based campaigns. What people tend to not understand is when you're playing a spellcaster and you get a certain level abilities, they might not seem as potent as other things, but you have to understand at 6th level you're getting access to 3rd level spells. So in some cases that's like fireball, like it's a very, very good spell slot level. You can cast very cool spells from it that have a lot of utility or a lot of damage depending on the availability of your spell list or whatever character class you're playing. So people tend to negate the importance of that when they're looking at a subclass, because it doesn't necessarily equate to the power that you get from hitting that level. So Oceanic Soul is very defensive and a cool communication ability, but people tend to think that this is lackluster because it doesn't include any kind of big buffs to anything. But you're already casting 3rd level spells at this point, and it's very brand new 3rd level spells. So it's a very strong level anyway for warlocks. So don't be disheartened because you don't get something crazy or other classes might get something at that point, because you're a warlock. Your damage is covered by Hex, and you can use Hex and Tentacles of the Deep at the same time. You just have to make sure to pop Tentacle first, and then to swap Hex out before you move the Tentacle again. It's really not that difficult, and you can basically cover all of your damage with that. But it's not necessarily about that. It's about understanding the full concept of the character, and that gets really lost, especially if you're watching people that try to optimize builds, because a lot of it is trying to get the most you can out of a level as opposed to getting your character to be comparable. As long as you're able to work within the same context of your party's demographics as far as abilities, you're useful, you're great, you're totally within the mix, and your abilities that make you definitively different is what's going to make you shine. So don't be disheartened if this is just like, oh, but that's all I get at 6th level and someone else gets something crazy at that level. It's that person's time to shine. Remember, you've had Tentacles from level 1. You've been able to sprout that when everyone just has one attack. You've been changing the battlefield for a long time. You can take a step back for a little bit, take a defensive bonus, and still be top dog if you want to. Don't worry about building yourself towards one specific thing. Worry about building your character, not your damage. At 6th level, you get another ability. This one is called Guardian Coil. This one lets you use your Tentacle of the Deep ability in a defensive manner. You can use a reaction to reduce the amount of damage someone within the 10-foot radius of the tentacle takes. It's reduced by 1d8 up until you hit level 10, and then it's reduced by 2d8. A little bit of extra defense doesn't hurt anybody, making this a very strong cool ability to use in tandem with your other ones, which is that nice little building upon yourself and making sure your abilities don't fall flat in the wayside and keep growing with you. I like it because of the flavor of it. I like the ability to use this tentacle to kind of bash away damage. So hey, maybe you only took 6 or 7 damage and this just batted it away. That's a very cool thing. I happen to enjoy it. It's a nice way to keep your tentacles involved and important to you and work with the positioning of it. At 10th level, you get an ability called Grasping Tentacles. This gives you the ability to cast Evard's Black Tentacles, the spell, without using a spell slot, once per day, per long rest. Also, damage cannot break your concentration on this spell, which is incredible. Also, you get temporary HP equal to your Warlock level for casting it. This is very cool because Evard's Black Tentacle, although it doesn't scale with level, still causes difficult terrain. On top of that, it causes the restrain condition if they fail a dexterity save. If you're smart, you position this and your tentacles in tandem with each other. So that way if someone has to go through it, they have to hit the tentacles, or the tentacles can hit them in the interim, and then slow their movement speed from getting out of difficult terrain, increasing the amount of times they will take damage and the chances for them to fail that save and be restrained. You can cast this normally as a spell afterwards, and it does not say that you do not get the added benefit of the temporary HP when you cast it normally. The scale doesn't go up in level with damage or anything like that, but having this as an ability you can drop for free once per day is a dynamic game changer of a battlefield control spell because it can cause the restrained condition. Throw on repelling blasts for invocation for eldritch blast, and you can shove people right back in there. Be smart, be tactical, and you can do a lot of great things with a spell like this, and it's cool because it fits who you are. This is like the coup de grace kind of a feeling. This is like the empowerment of your fathomless patron because it's underwater and it just erupts from the ground wherever you are, and it feels good to cast this spell this way. It feels cool to just line up tentacles and just go for it. It's a lot of great things that you can do with it. It's very, very cool. Very, very looking forward to using this spell once you get up to that level and you can cast it in this kind of a way. Plus the temporary HP is an incredibly added benefit, and it feels good because it erupts from the spell. It like joins you to it, and that's a very great like role-playing-esque kind of a feel, and bringing a lot of roleplay into combat that way. Fathomless Plunge. This is the ability you get at 14th level. It gives you a group teleport, really, that can send you up to a mile away into a pond, or at least a body of water that's about that size. The flavor text for it is very cool because an eruption of tentacles occurs and grabs all of your party members or whoever's willing and just pulls you through basically magic or whatever it is into this body of water. I think it's great as a concept. I think they missed the mark with how the world is set up, because most of the time you're not near a body of water. I mean, how often do you really even do that anyway? Unless it's like really like you're literally on ships, you're not really going to see that often unless you go into an underwater cave, in which case you can teleport your way out of the jungle. I think you should just be able to teleport 100 feet away. I think you should just kind of pull, like a gateway should open and just tentacles should just erupt through it, grab your party members and pull them through, and then release you into another world or another like area, but like it pulls you through this like watery opening where like a floodgate almost opens, and it's like a portal to like the water plane or the deeps of the ocean where your patron lives, and you just get shunted out and it just splashes water everywhere. I would change that to that and make it a little bit more dynamic or interesting, or maybe work it so that way it equates to some sort of, maybe it puts out fires or something, like, you know, and it just it's cooler feeling that way, and it's more viable as opposed to like an escape from a dungeon kind of spell from like those old RPGs from when I was younger. Flavor wise, it's cool. I would definitely try to use this constantly, even though it really didn't help me much, because I like that idea, that theory that these tentacles are just not just to hurt people or to protect me and whoever I deem fit, but they can also bring me to new worlds, and I like that concept. Once I hit this level, I'll probably use that if I was ever going to go into another dimension or be teleported or to sent to another plane. I would want this to kind of bring me that way. Like, this would be now my mode of transportation no matter what happens if it involves magic, which I think can be a great concept. I think it can be role played very well, but as it is, it doesn't give you much, which is unfortunate. But if you do happen to find a pond right before you go into a dungeon, this is a quick escape. This is a quick way to save everybody's life, which is a nice thing that usually warlocks don't get to do. So without further ado, I'm going to jump into my final thoughts. If you've made it this far, please like, share, subscribe. It's wildly important to us as a growing channel. So my final thoughts on this subclass: it's awesome. Don't be afraid to use it. I go into the desert with this subclass, and I'll tell you exactly why. First and foremost, you can role play it out really well. You have strong enough things in your kit to make yourself viable and useful in combat, so that's taken care of, and that's a major concern that most people generally have. Also, you have enough of the flavor of who your character is that this impacts not only just what you can do in combat, but how your character feels and how your character acts, and this desire to want to be submerged and want to be in water, and it feels good. You know, you feel dominant there. That's where you want to be. You know, and I think that's a great, cool thing. I think you can do a lot with the role-playing value. I would try and play as much of the patron as possible, or even play them both if your DM lets you do that, and just have these cool moments where you can just involve yourself in what your patron's thinking, and maybe communicate some of those things, or just show this beautiful side to the world that nobody ever really gets to see, because everyone just kind of stays really far away from the ocean. It's cool. Don't worry about things not being 100% useful. A lot of people think that if everything isn't useful all of the time, it's not worth it. Yeah, you might not be underwater a lot. Yeah, there might only be one time in the whole scenario where you might even be able to swim. But when you do go to get those things, they're great and you feel good. Remember, playing a subclass doesn't deviate from the strength of the regular class. The Warlock is a very powerful class. Don't negate that when picking your subclasses. So if you get these things that aren't incredibly useful all of the time, you're a spellcaster. You're useful all of the time. The strength of who you are depends on your spell selections. So it's cool to pick a damage, a direct damage, an AoE, and an escape. But you have the ability to pick other things that are utility and maybe conditions and things like that. And that's what makes your character incredibly worth it. You know, it makes your character viable. It makes other characters depend on your character. And that group dynamic is what makes this game awesome. Don't worry about things not being perfectly useful every time. People put such a high standard on using abilities constantly, and then they hoard them and don't ever use them. You gotta be willing to just take a chance on some things. This is a great concept. It's a great story that you can tell. There's a lot of viability here. Don't be scared by things being not constantly useful, and embrace the few times they might show up, or more so why you wanted to play this in the first place. You're here because you thought this was cool. It is. Do it. Don't let anything else get in your way. And thanks for giving the Spooky Kid a chance.